Listo.
Yes, do you hear me?
I hear you. Everything ready now.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Ivan, and thank you, Jairo, for the introduction. And yeah, let me start sharing my screen properly. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. I am very pleased to be here with you virtually for the very first Drupal Camp Virtual Columbia. 2020 has been a very interesting year, and conferences have taken a big change from how they used to be. But the positive side is that I can be with you today virtually. So that is really great. I'm calling from Germany, but I'm having fond memories of the one trip that I was able to take to Bogota in 2015, where Jairo gave me a beautiful tour of the city. And I really came to appreciate your country through that one trip. I hope to visit you again sometime in the future. So as Ivan said, I'm going to be speaking about Drupal distributions as business drivers. But first, I would like to start by talking about what makes Drupal unique. Some of the unique qualities about Drupal, as you know, are that it has entities, okay? Entities are what allow us to be able to quickly model data. So if I want to have an e-commerce website, I can model my products. If I have a specialized content website, I can model the different types of content that I have. I can even model user profiles or model different types of comments with these entities, which is great. And this gives us CRUD capabilities where you can create, revise, and delete, update the content or the entities of your site. Also unique in Drupal is the views module, which gives the website administrator the ability to create custom displays of the data that you create with the entities. These two things alone have made Drupal very popular for certain types of websites. Newer in Drupal, but also very important to keep it relevant for today's web, is the JSON API, which enables us alternate front ends, such as React.js or Gatsby or mobile apps through the APIs. And finally, one of the really important unique qualities that sets Drupal apart from all other systems that I know of are its install profiles, which can also be turned into distributions. There is a difference between an install profile and a distribution. But in general, that's what we're going to be talking about the most in this. So let's go on into that. But before we do, let me just also mention that Drupal has a very successful niche on the web for content-rich sites that require user interaction and some level of transactional interaction. Like I fill out forms, I have some workflows, but we'd never replace, for example, our ERP system or some very highly specialized apps with Drupal. We just would never do that because that would not make sense. Let's focus now on installation profiles. What can an install profile do? So install profiles, as you're probably aware, can tell Drupal when you install it to install custom modules, either, and it can differentiate between available and required modules, and it can list and require different themes than what are in core. It can also import translations. It can import config. So Drupal has a very full-fledged configuration management solution where you can export and import configuration. So you can do that like views and settings during the installation phase. And you can also run custom install scripts, which means at that point you can do just about anything. You can import database data, you can pull more files in. You can use the entity API to create some content or users or set environmental variables. Anything you can do in the script, you can do at that phase. So it's very powerful. This is just one of the files that you would find in an install profile. It's a YAML file, info.yaml. And here you can see, for example, the modules that are being listed to install and those that are required. Okay, so it makes it very easy for me when I'm creating an install profile to make a list of these modules that I would want. And in doing so, it would customize the way that Drupal ends up being installed. And this is what it looks like when you install Drupal core. And you've seen this screen before. And this just demonstrates that even Drupal core comes with 3 install profiles. One that is a standard profile, one that is a minimal profile, and then there's also a demo site, the Umami Food magazine, which gives a lot more evidence of the power. For example, when you install that, not only do you get a working website with content and images, but it's also imported the Spanish translation, and you can immediately use the site in Spanish. And this is all due to the install profile. Now, there is a setting in one of those YAML files in the install profile to say whether or not it's a distribution. And the difference between a distribution and an install profile is simply that when you label something as a distribution, then the installer for Drupal will assume that that's what you're installing. So for the Opinio LMS, it's labeled as a distribution, and therefore the installer simply skipped the standard, minimal, and Umami install profiles, even though they're there, and it goes for the Opinio install profile, which is a distribution, and it installs this. So there is a difference between install profile and distribution. That difference is not important for most of what I'm going to talk about today, but you can safely assume that from now on, I'm pretty much talking about distributions all the time. So there are lots of these on Drupal.org. Oh, that's not going to work. Okay. That's okay. This was a video, and we had some problems with the screen sharing beforehand, and I forgot about this. So we exported it as a PDF. This is what a video looks like in a PDF file. But if you close your eyes and imagine that I had gone to Drupal.org and I had looked at the Drupal.org distributions, then you would see things like Commerce Kickstart and Open Atrium and Drupal Commons and the Opinio LMS and many, many, many more distributions that are listed on Drupal.org. And I only wanted to do that to show you that there are a lot of these already being listed, and also to highlight the fact that when you do release a distribution via Drupal.org, you get a lot of publicity because people like you and me go and browse the list of distributions on Drupal.org, and they see your distribution there, and they become curious and they can install it, and that can be a great marketing tool. So sorry for the black screen here. If you want to experience this video, I encourage you to go to Drupal.org and browse the distributions. All right, moving on. So there is a downside to install profiles and distributions, especially if you want to do the distribution on Drupal.org thing that I just mentioned and get your distribution listed on Drupal.org in the distributions. It means that there are layers of indirection. So you add your YAML files and some other files to your install profile project, and then Drupal.org goes and builds it, and then it appears. And it usually takes a few times to get that right before it's building correctly and working the way you want. And the whole build process on Drupal.org is it's less than transparent because it's not part of Drupal itself. So it's a mystery unless you look into it, of course, how that's done. So it is a bit of a layer of indirection, especially these days, considering that much of what you can do with Drupal install profiles or distributions could also be done with Composer these days, and or a site like GitHub or GitLab. So I think that the relevance of Drupal install profiles and distributions has somewhat reduced through the use of Composer and GitHub, but I do still think for Drupal in general, this is a very relevant topic. And as I'm going to show you now, it can be a very strong business driver for you. So what are some of the most important profiles out there now and also throughout history? So I list Drupal Commons first, and you probably wouldn't think that that is currently the most important Drupal distribution. And it's also not the one that's been installed the most. The one that has been installed the most is Drupal Commerce Kickstart, a product which I had a part in making when I was part of Commerce Guys. So Commerce Kickstart is still the most popular Drupal distribution. But in a moment, when we get to the history section of this, I'm going to explain to you why I think that Drupal Commons is one of the most important historically. As I mentioned, Drupal Commerce Kickstart is currently, and has been for quite a long time, the most downloaded and installed Drupal distribution. Open Social is one that I'm going to talk about quite a bit today because they are very relevant today and are doing a lot today. So I'll get to them in a moment. And Opinio is one that I already showed you the installing screen from, and I'm going to mention some more things about them as well. I think they're quite important, and there's a company behind it, and they have a lot of momentum. And an LMS is a learning management system. Also, you might be aware that since COVID-19 has occurred, that a lot of people are doing learning online, and learning management systems have become a fairly sought after type of web application in general. And I know from the Opinio team directly that they have seen a large uptick in the interest in their project. So this is one of the important ones as well. I just wanted to give those as some examples so you can start to orient your mind around what kind of products Drupal distributions can be. All right. Now let's get on to the business cases for Drupal distributions so I can explain to you how those can be drivers of your business. All right, the first case that I make for Drupal distributions is probably the most common case, and that it can accelerate the work for your web agency or for you personally as a developer. So there's one distribution on Drupal.org that says it saves you 200 hours every time, and they're probably right. The idea behind making a Drupal distribution for your agency is really simple. You do projects building sites for customers on Drupal, and some parts of every engagement are similar. So you make decisions about what modules you like, what themes you like, and you tend to use those solutions over and over again to solve problems because you've already done the research, you've already had success with it, you know how it goes, you have code examples that you can draw on, and it just really makes a lot of sense to not always reinvent the wheel every time you have a customer project. So encapsulating your favorite modules and themes and anything else that you do over and over again inside of a Drupal distribution that you use every time you start a client project really makes sense. Furthermore, you can have customizations that are specific to the industries that you focus on. So you could have a publishing distribution or a social distribution or an e-commerce distribution. And those customizations could be industry specific for each of those distributions. And that would give you an advantage when you are doing sales and doing delivery in those industries. You know that it's going to save you 200 hours every time, to take the quote from the, I think it's the Verbase distribution. Since you know that, then you might have a competitive advantage in the sales process because you can bid lower, and your delivery will be faster and more consistent as well. So there are big advantages there. Furthermore, the next customer will always benefit from the previous customer's expenditure, because as you go and do a new project, you'll probably improve and expand the distribution with the new things that you're trying and the new things that you're learning. So it becomes an evolving project that captures the best practice of your agency. So that was case number one. Case number two is to make a distribution as a product framework. So this is simply an evolution of what I just mentioned, which was to have industry-specific customizations put into your distribution that you're maintaining. But at some point, you might give it a name, and you might actually start communicating that name internally or externally and talking about it as if it's a product. It's not really a product yet because you couldn't really hand it to somebody and have them have success with it. It's more like all of your tools that you need to serve that industry, all readily packaged and conveniently ready to help you create a new site for that industry. But because you give it a product name, because you treat it like a product, because you then start to do some marketing around it, then you increase the sense in the public that you're an expert for that field. And if you do release it, even if it's not a finished product, and other people use it to also service customers in the same industry, then you might have some benefits from open source, benefits like people making pull requests on your distribution if it's public, or knock on reputation benefits. When people see other agencies using your code, then they might really have a lot of respect for you and the distribution that you've made, even though it's still just a collection of tools that save you 200 or 300 hours when making a website for a specific industry vertical. So here I have product X as the placeholder for the product name that you're going to give your distribution, and you start to advertise it as such. And this is really nice. How does that work? So probably you'll have done 2, 3, 4 sites within that industry, and they've been successful, and you've got happy customers, and you go back to them and say, hey, you know, we're making this into a product X. You use product X. You never knew it even, but you use product X. Could you say something great about product X? And then all of a sudden you've got somebody in the publishing industry saying, yeah, we use product X, even though it's, you know, just the site that you build for them. Fair enough, because it's built on your distribution, you can call it product X. And you can start to communicate about a feature set. If you think about how people buy or procure software, they really go for feature sets, right? You first search for software products that are in the industry and try to solve the general use case that you're looking for. E-commerce for restaurants, okay? Social media for publishers. So I would start with a search that's like that. And then when I find something that has an interesting name, looks like it's a legitimate website, comes up good in the Google results, then I'll go there and I'll look at the feature set. I'll also look at the pricing, of course, but I'll start with the feature set. I don't want to look at any software that doesn't have the features that I'm looking for. And when you start to advertise a product based on a Drupal distribution, you can create marketing around a feature set that's going to attract exactly the type of customers that would need that product. And an interesting point about that has come up a couple times recently in the past couple days with conversations that I've had with business owners who are doing this is that oftentimes the marketing for your agency is in fact different than the marketing that you would want for product X, because the feature set of your agency might be expertise in Drupal, fans of open source, great rates, good delivery, works on weekends, who knows? It's up to you and your agency, right? So, and you might say also be able to do mobile apps with React Native, something like that. You might have all sorts of feature sets that your agency has, but those feature sets are different than the product X feature set, which might be customizable checkout for your products, automatic listing in all of the product aggregators, integration with Stripe and PayPal. Okay, so those are the features of product X, and they're different than the features of your agency. So by calling it product X and giving it its own marketing and feature set, you might attract the customers who really need it in a way that you're not reaching with the marketing for your agency, who might not be looking for your Drupal expertise or your open source passions or your ability to work on weekends. So think about that. If you're doing this with your own company, ask yourself, are we actually marketing our product the right way? Is it actually separate from our agency? And by giving it the name and that marketing, it becomes bigger than what it was before. It was just the Drupal distribution that you were using to accelerate the work inside of your agency. By making it have its own landing page and a feature set, it becomes much bigger. And I have a great example of that coming up to talk about around Drupal Commons, about how much bigger that can become. You still have to set it up and customize it though. One of the people that I talked to recently who's doing this says that they advertise. It's 2 months, 2 weeks to set it up, 2 months to customize it before you can use it. So this is not like, I don't know, Zoom or Twitter, where you sign up and you start using it right away. This is something else. Okay, this is a product framework still. So you might advertise that it takes 2 weeks to set up and 2 months or 4 months to customize it, and that you need to have some budget around that. But the good news is you'll have product X exactly like you need it. All right, so what is that story that I wanted to tell you about Drupal Commons? Okay, I don't know if all of you are all aware of Drupal Commons, but it was if I can tell you a little bit about the history of Acquia, and you know Acquia because they're the biggest Drupal company. They just got acquired last year and a lot of people got rich. Yay, good for them. And this is the company that was started by Dries, who is also the person who started Drupal, who is also the person who runs the Drupal Association. So I'm sure that you know Acquia. Now, when Acquia started, they had a Drupal distribution called Acquia Drupal, which was simply the 50 most common modules that people used in a distribution and nothing else. It was useless. Nobody liked it. It didn't do anything for Acquia, so they gave up on that. And the founder of Acquia, not Dries, the other founder, Jay Batson, he was very smart. He's still very smart. And his smartness was that they needed a Drupal-based product to attack an actual vertical market in the industry. And the vertical market that Jay thought would be the easiest to attack was corporate social software. So software used by businesses and enterprises to have the social interactions that people were getting accustomed to on Facebook but within their company and not on Facebook, because Facebook is awful and you should all quit Facebook right now. I'll pause the keynote while you go do it. Good. Everybody off Facebook? Thank you. So Jay did very good research about exactly the feature set that businesses wanted when they were looking for social software. And he pulled together all of the Drupal modules that offered that functionality. And instead of Acquia Drupal, which was just an unconfigured lump of modules that may or may not be used together, all of a sudden Drupal Commons was a bunch of modules that were designed to give you the features that were most asked for by business social software users. And then they made a theme for it and a very small amount of configuration so that it was set up with organic groups when you installed it, and you could do some very basic workflows that represented business social software. In all, it took a few months to conceive of this and research it and do the engineering to put it together. Really rapid time to market. And they have it a press release, and it was well received because it looked good when you installed it and you could actually do some things that were very useful. And because it had such a clear defined feature set, it got a reaction from the incumbent, the giant in the field, Jive Software. Absolutely made a stupid mistake and started bad-mouthing not only Acquia Drupal Commons, but open source in general. And Acquia jumped on that. And the CEO wrote a blog post, which is no longer on the net. Unfortunately, I couldn't find it. They've taken it down, called Don't Jive With Me, which if you're familiar with the English language and that word jive, it's like saying don't mess with me, but it's actually using the name of the software company in the blog post. It was a direct frontal attack against a huge incumbent software making billions of dollars. And they only needed 2 months of engineering R&D to make those claims against this company. And all of a sudden, Acquia was being invited to procurement bids against Jive and winning. So you might not know that story, but I witnessed that firsthand from inside the company. And I thought it was just a brilliant move by Jay Batson and Tom Erickson to come up with that distribution, give it that feature set, do the marketing around it, and then position it directly against the biggest software in that field, and to start to win with it right away. So that was when I became super convinced about Drupal distributions as business drivers. Let's move on though. Let's talk about SaaS products. All right, this is actually for me where things start getting super interesting. What is SaaS? Software as a service. That's the software where you sign up on a website, and after you put your credit card in, or even before, you're using software in the browser, and that's great. Like Gmail was one of the most successful software as a service products ever. Before Gmail, there was, of course, Hotmail, but let's forget about Hotmail or Yahoo Mail. Those were awful. There were a lot of desktop clients for mail, and maybe some of you still use, like on your Mac, the mail program. But for a lot of people like myself, once Gmail came out, I never wanted to do mail on my desktop ever again. I only wanted to do it in the browser as software as a service. So of course that's hosted and managed software. Google hosts Gmail. Twitter hosts Twitter. Facebook hosts and manages Facebook. Did you quit Facebook, by the way? You're supposed to by the end of the keynote. Thank you. Customers don't need to know about the details. They don't need to know if it's open source or not. They don't need to know if it's Drupal. They don't need to know what modules or themes are going on. The only thing they need to know is that they can log in and do their work. The features are the features. What does that mean? That means that you can't really extend Gmail directly. Okay, maybe there are plugins or apps or some other concept that the software has for being extended. That's great, but you can't really go and say install a module the way that you can with Drupal, where a module could have source code in it that could completely alter everything in the system, right? Including having bugs. You can't do that with software as a service software because the features are the features. If the feature doesn't exist, then you don't get it. There's also an interesting question that I'm going to go into around multi-tenant or single tenant. And there's also, when you're thinking about Drupal providing SaaS software, a lot to think about in terms of the customer journey and the e-commerce. So let's move into that. Let's talk about single tenant versus multi-tenant. I'm sure most of you have thought about this before, but single tenant is when one customer gets an instantiation of the app that has their own app code and its own database, as highlighted by Mr. Red, Green, and Blue getting red, green, and blue apps and red, green, and blue databases. Multi-tenant is the same application and maybe separate databases, but maybe the same database, okay? So this is not totally accurate. So here, red, green, and blue all use red, green, and blue on the app. And in this diagram, they use red, green, and blue databases. But if you think about Facebook or Twitter, then you know for sure that that's one database, essentially, where worldwide, all of the people who use Twitter or Facebook are all part of the same database. Otherwise, how would you people in Colombia read all of the tweets from Donald Trump, right? You need everybody in one database. So that's multi-tenant, multiple people, multiple tenants occupying one instantiation of the app and database. So let me put those in Drupal terms. If I were going to give you a commerce kickstart as a service, and you always got a new version of commerce kickstart for yourself with your own database, that would be single tenant. But if I asked you to enter your store name, and I did a funny thing with views and content permissions so that your products and your storefront were simply part of the main installation, and I only had one commerce kickstart and one database, then that would be multi-tenant. Now, Drupal, as you can imagine, for a case like that, is way better off being run as a single tenant application because every customer would want their own commerce kickstart. But if you were building a SaaS product where all of the customers needed to share data with each other, like if you were making a social network for cats, for cat pictures, then you would definitely want to be multi-tenant, and basically everybody would sign up on one site. There are advantages and disadvantages of each of those approaches beyond just the requirements of the use case. So single tenant apps, remember those are the ones on the left here, single tenant apps, they have isolation from each other. So you can scale each one, and if you can scale each one individually, and a lot of customers need their data to be isolated. They wouldn't want their data to be in a shared environment. And you can customize isolated apps more easily. If one customer needs an extra module or some customization on the theme, it's much easier to customize that in a single tenant situation than it is in a multi-tenant situation. Multi-tenant advantages, however, are that the customers can interact with each other. You can read Donald Trump's tweets, which I know you do, right? Don't do that. And quit Facebook. Plus, another advantage is that the cost per customer is smaller. So if you add a new user to an existing Drupal site, it costs less than creating a whole new Drupal site. That's kind of obvious. Let's talk about the customer journey and the e-commerce aspect of it. So it's one thing to have a Drupal distribution, and maybe you want to run that as a single tenant app. So maybe you have an LMS based on the Opinio LMS that you've customized for your local market, and everybody who signs up is going to get an instantiation of that LMS. So those would be these customers 1, 2, 3, and customer N down here. These are instantiations of your LMS. But they don't start here. They start with e-commerce and marketing. They find your website, they make a shopping cart, they look at your pricing, they check the features, they put their billing and payment details in so that it can be charged on Stripe every month. They pick the right plan that you've put out there for them, whether it's small, medium, or large. And when they do all of that and they do the checkout, then the system calls out somehow, and this is code that you have to write because there's no system that does this for you, to grab the code from your code repository like GitHub and instantiate a site, say for customer N. And when customer N's site is ready, then it sends the details back to this site so that you can expose those to the customer. So there's a workflow here. At Platform SH, we've helped some customers actually get this set up. Open Social is one of them. So that was what I had to say about SaaS. Now, this is the most interesting part of my show today, and that is the fourth case, which is PaaS. Platform as a service. Now you're familiar with the concept of platform as a service because Pantheon, Acquia, and Platform SH all offer platform as a service for Drupal. So you've probably read about those and heard about those, but the idea is that you provide your code and you can access and modify your code at any time. And the platform as a service provides the infrastructure, provides the backend services like the databases, provides support. It might build your code using Composer. It might do other things like run other runtimes, but in general, you only have to worry about your code. If you're thinking about a Drupal distribution, I need to come back to the main benefit that Drupal has altogether. And I didn't really state this in the first part, so I'll state it now really clearly. The main benefit that Drupal brings, which is the reason that we all use it, is that you can customize it and extend it. It's not because of what it does out of the box. It's not because it's the fastest program on earth or the best coded program on earth or anything like that. The only reason that we really use it is because there's a lot of feature and functionality that's available, and you can extend it and customize it as you need it to be. So the advantages of Drupal as a software as a service are not really that great, in my opinion, and that's why I think platform as a service is more interesting. So let's take the Opinio or the Commerce Kickstart examples. If I'm doing a commerce site, very likely I need customizations beyond what's in the package, but they're unique to me, so you can't really make a package, a distribution that satisfies everybody's needs. It might be as simple as what payment provider I need. I might live in a part of the country, part of the world that has different payment providers, so I need different payment provider modules. To do that extension, I need to be able to add a module, okay? And this is really important because Drupal and some other frameworks like Symfony framework or Magento, which I'm going to talk about, these are built as frameworks, not finished products. They need code to be extended. Therefore, offering them as platform as a service makes a lot of sense. And the concept here as a Drupal distribution product would be that you maintain your Kickstart or your LMS with its modules and its configuration, but your customer needs configuration and extension. How do you do that without getting into conflict? Where's my conflict? Yes, I'm skipping ahead. How do you avoid the conflict between the vendor who's providing the upstream code and the client who can actually break the site with their code? They can change the upstream code if it's in a platform as a service, and the upgrades become impossible and the support becomes impossible. That's the trick. And this is where I think there's huge potential for Drupal distributions in the platform as a service context. Let me back up a couple slides and tell you about Magento, which is similar to Drupal. Magento is similar to Drupal in that it's extensible, it's PHP, you write modules and themes to extend it, but it's focused on e-commerce, obviously. Magento now has a cloud. In 3 years, when between, I don't know, I think it was like 2015 and 2018, I can't remember precisely, Magento increased their market valuation by 7 times. And the main thing they did in that time was to release the Magento Cloud, the Magento Commerce Cloud, which is a platform as a service that has, of course, the cloud infrastructure. It has platform as a service where the customers can modify and access the code based on Composer and Git. Then it also has a license for Magento Commerce, okay? And this is the upstream vendor connection. The upstream vendor, Magento, provides this. Then it has some tools like New Relic and Fastly on top, okay? That's what a platform as a service offering can look like for a distribution. The distribution here being Magento Commerce, not a Drupal distribution. Similarly, the Symfony Cloud also has a similar concept in that you can get a long-term support version of Symfony, the ability to extend, maintain code, and all of the infrastructure and backend services are provided. Easy Platform Cloud also has a platform as a service. Easy Platform is similar to Drupal in that it's a content management system in PHP, and they also have a platform as a service. So I mentioned the conflict as a disadvantage, but here's the potential solution, okay? And this is where you want to get your iPhone out and take a picture or take a screen grab so you can look at this and think about this later. What if the platform as a service installed the Drupal install profile like you see here as part of the default build, but then it allowed you to have a GitHub repository or two? One would be your modules repository. One would be your themes module or themes repository. And at build time, whatever you put in those GitHub repositories, it would pull into the Drupal distribution that it was managing for you. That would be great because that would relieve this conflict. All right, the customer would never be able to touch the code that you were providing in the distribution, because their only way that they would have to put code into the system would be to add it to their GitHub repository, which you would pull in for them during the build. So this is just one idea. There are lots of ways you could do things like this. But this would allow you to have a Drupal distribution that customers could add to with modules and themes on their own, and you would always know who broke it because you could add their code. You could build the distribution and test it, and then if it broke after that, it was clearly their code that did it. I'm quickly, because we're almost out of time, going to go through some more examples. GovCMS from Australia is a distribution that has compliance for the government, sophisticated workflows, Google Website Analytics. Based on that, there's a German version called DE-Gov, which is also its own distribution, maintained by Public Plan. There's one that's made by a consortium of German publishers called Thunder, which is great for enterprise publishing for like large magazines. Opinio, I mentioned already. OpenDevX.io is from Srijan, an Indian company that is a API portal framework. So it manages all of your APIs and you connect to your different API providers and it connects them together. It's similar to Apigee Edge, in case you've heard of Apigee or Apigee Edge. And finally, from your own country, from Seed, from Hyro, there are the LMS and commerce solutions that are being offered, which are based on Opinio and Drupal Commerce, but customized, like I talked about, for the local market. So there are lots of examples of this in action. I love Drupal distributions, and we're pretty much out of time because I took a long time, but maybe we have time for questions. If not, you can send your questions to me afterwards on Twitter at Robert Douglas, or write to me directly, robert@platform.sh. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Okay, it seems like there are no questions, comments at this moment.
No problem. As I mentioned, you can find me on Twitter and on email, robert@platform.sh. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.